Hi everybody, this will be part 35 of the character rigging tutorial series. In this video we're going to talk about how to rig accessories. In previous videos I discussed how to set up skin weights, joints for this cloth that's around the character, draping over the shoulders and around the neck. So we're going to talk about how to create controls for the cloth, and then I also quickly modeled like a little satchel bag that would sit around on the character's hip. Just as a demo, this wouldn't be on my final character here. So we'll talk about how to set up controls for both of these in this video. Alright, so I'm going to turn on my joints for a second and I'll show you that I've already created a series of curve controls. And these are on the same points as the joints for the cloth. Okay, I've set these up in the same exact way. Maybe if I turn off my texture, you can kind of see them. Same exact way as I've done before for forward kinematic controls. So there's some previous videos on how I set up the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist. I created a new curve. I rotated it. Let's see, just make sure we have the right one. So here's my curve for my first cloth joint. That'll be my first cloth joints control. So I created a control, a curve control, and I have rotated it so it follows the length of that joint. And then I duplicated them down and duplicated around so that all of the curve controls are rotated and positioned properly. Turn off my joints so that I can move and animate my cloth. Okay. So every one of these curve controls, the ones that are white right now that are selected, are right on top of the joints, rotated so they follow down the length of the joints. So the other thing that I've done is I wanted to keep that rotate angle but freeze the transforms. So with each control here, I've selected the curve, then shift selected the joint, and then I've opened up my script editor and I've ran the offset controller script. So this is a script from Tina O'Haley's Rig It Right book that freezes the transforms for a curve but keeps the angles of my individual curves set for me so that I can rotate it based off of the joint angle. So that's where these extra groups come into play. So basically each curve with that offset controller script, when I've done the freeze and transforms with that script, it creates a group. The transforms stay on the group while the curve transforms get frozen. And then what I've done is go ahead and set up the hierarchy so that furthest from the center of the body, this last curve, the group created from that offset controller is parented to the next curve up. That group for that curve is parented to the next curve up. So it's a stair-step pattern, so that way each control will work properly. We've talked about this and shown this in previous videos of how to do the hierarchy for the wrist, elbow, and shoulder, and this is the same exact method. So I have individual hierarchies for the curves that I'll then parent up to my spine control for the character later. So it's a pretty complex hierarchy, but you can take a look at this. I won't move the cursor of the screen for a second so you can take a look. See how that hierarchy is set up? So basically this is the control left cloth 1 hierarchy, and this is the joints on the top left arm. Okay, so the controls have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the 5 joints. And how I'm going to set this up is I'm going to want to be able to kind of move this top joint. So this top joint and the curve associated with it, the control will be a parent constraint. And then the secondary joints, I just want to be able to rotate them. So those will just be orient constraints. So to save some time, I've gone ahead and created the curves, placed them, rotated them in place, and then set up the offset controller script, which created these extra groups. You can go back and review the FK controls for the arms with the previous video to see a more in-depth version of how I've set up this hierarchy. All right, so I have my curves, And what I'm going to do is now set up the constraint so that the curves will drive the motion of the joints. So each, let me go through and select each of the base joints for the cloth. Each one of these top ones are going to be parent constraints with this base control. And then all of these secondary joints in each of these structures are going to be orient constraints to the curve control. So that way that's going to give me proper motion of the cloth how I want it to be. So with the top left, I'm going to select this base curve control, which is my C_L cloth for control left cloth. And then I'm going to shift select the joint, and then we're going to go up to constrain, parent, we'll go to the box beside it. When I click on that, I'm going to choose maintain offset. Okay, so each one of the base ones for each of the cloth sections is going to be a parent constraint. And then as I move further away from the torso, I'm going to select the second cloth control, shift select the second joint, and then do an orient constraint. I'm going to once again make sure maintain offset's turned on. So that way each one of these going outward is an orient constraint. And I'm going to continue to do this until I get to the end. Orient constraint, curve, and then control. Then we'll do orient constraint. So that way, that hierarchy, if I select the base curve control and move that or rotate that, that should move everything. And then if I go to each individual curve control for the cloth joint system there, after that and rotate that, it's going to rotate those areas of the cloth properly. Okay, so the hierarchy has to be set properly, and then we're doing a parent constraint for the base, orient constraints for the subset joints. All right, I'm going to pause the video. I'm just going to repeat those steps for the rest of the curve controls on the cloth. We'll come back and I'm going to show you how they can all work. Okay, I'm back. So each one of these curve controls now will move the joint. So if I come over here to this one and rotate that, that'll move that joint in the cloth. If I come in here and rotate that one, I'm selecting the curve controls, and each one of the bases will be able to move and rotate those. So if I turn off the joints, all of these blue controls around the cloth give me the option to be able to animate the cloth. So that's really nice because I can come in here, and if the arm needs to go up, I can rotate the arm, and then I can go select the base control for that shoulder of the cloth, move it up, rotate it, and then make my individual adjustments to the smaller little pieces. I can kind of rotate some down, allow that to kind of appear more natural as it hits there maybe. So the idea with animating this would be to animate the arm, and then I have the option to come in here and make smaller refinements if I wanted to kind of rotate in more but move out. Okay, so it follows in line with what the arm is doing. I'm just doing test motions right now, so I'll undo all that back. There we go. So each one of these curve controls affects a different area of the body. So the parent constraint is good to correct any clipping as each individual joint will kind of rotate. So rotate that one out, but I need to move the top one up so it doesn't clip. So that's a good way to kind of set up cloth controls. So then we can colorize them so that way maybe they're easier to see with whatever the texture looks like on the character. My texture is kind of dark, so I might want to colorize them a lighter color, maybe a lighter, really light green. I don't know. We'll try to come up with something at the end of this video. So that's how I would address joints and controls for cloth. There are other ways to do this. We can set up set-driven keys like we did the fingers. But typically the cloth is going to be moving a lot of different angles, so it's a lot easier and more fluent from the animation standpoint if you just have FK controls like what we set up with the curve controls on the cloth right now that give you as much control as possible over what the cloth does. Alright, one last thing we need to do with the cloth before we move to the satchel is we need to parent up these separate control hierarchies. So that way when the spine and the pelvis move, those controls will move with it. Because right now, if I move the pelvis, the cloth stays put. So I don't want that. Okay, so zero that out. So what I want to happen is I want to parent the root control for each one of these cloth sections to the nearest control on the center of the torso. So that would be the spine 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each group, not the individual curve, but the group. And then I'm going to, let's turn off my geometry for a second and joints. So I want to select the base control group of that cloth base, and then shift select the curve of the C spine, okay, center spine, hit P for parent. So we're going to do that for all of these. So basically control group to the curve itself. Control group to curve, control group to curve, work our way all the way around. Control group to curve, and I'm hitting the P key each time for parent. Control to curve, there we go. So that way, if we turn our geometry back on and I rotate that spine control, it will rotate the clothing with it. Now you can see the clipping happening. So that's the reason why if I'm rotating it this way, I can still take that base control and move it up so that I don't have clipping in that angle. So that should work exactly how we want to. Now if I go back to the pelvis control and move that, the cloth should move with the body. Here we go. So the cloth works properly and as expected here. All right, last part of this video is going to talk about how to set up accessories that just need to move and be parented to the body. And what we're going to do is actually parent the control in hierarchy to the pelvis, and then we'll do some secondary things to it as well. So I've created a curve, okay, and this is just going to be my basic satchel curve control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this control. Let's make sure we do modify freeze transformation to get rid of all of those transforms that could be on there. And I'm going to shift select. I have a base joint for my satchel. So let's first talk about the satchel right now. So I created this base object. It's not too complex, just a demo file or demo object here. And I created a joint system. This is the root joint in the middle. So if I rotate or move that, it'll move based off of that point. And then I created a bottom joint so that I know kind of where I need that to stop in the direction of my satchel bag. And then I've created smaller joints that adjust the rotate of the flap or top of the bag. So I can create maybe some set-driven keys for those to make those easier to move and more fluent, more efficient to move as well. So maybe we can do some set-driven keys on the satchel control later. What we're going to do first is make sure this curve control for the satchel can drive the motion of the joint satchel. So I already have it on here, but let's remove it out and I'll recreate it. So basically here's my curve control, and then I'm going to shift select the base joint of that joint satchel, and we're going to do constrain, and we're going to do a parent constraint. Okay, so that way here's my control for the satchel. Whatever that does, moves and rotate wise, the joint will do the same thing. That's a good way to kind of set up control for an accessory, a weapon, or anything like that. Create a curve and then do a parent constraint with the root joint of that geometry. Just for reference, the geometry was skinned to the base of the satchel, was skinned to just the base joint, and then the flap was skinned to these selected joints, the top joints, just these top joints starting with this one. So skinning was also pretty quick and easy as well. All right, so that'll give me some base motion of the satchel itself. But now I want the satchel to move when certain body parts move. So it's going to be on the hip, so I definitely want to do a parent constraint to the hip. So the hip will drive the motion of the satchel. But I also want to set it up so that the hand, the left hand over here, can also pick up the satchel, and the satchel can be parented to the hand at certain times. It's a little bit complex, so we'll talk about it in the step process here. So we already have this control that's driving the motion of the satchel, and we want to be able to still have that individual motion. So what we need to do is take that control satchel and hit Control G to group that. And with that group, we're going to say control satchel GRP for group. Okay, I have an extra group here that I'll come back in the next video and talk about what's in there. So basically, we take that satchel curve and we group that let's go modify center pivot. That gives us another set of transforms that we can now parent up to when the hip moves or when the left wrist moves. So we cannot do that parent up hierarchy if we still want to have that individual motion of the satchel curve. All right, to set this up, we're going to take the right hip joint. The right hip joint is going to drive the motion of what the satchel group is going to do. So I'm going to take the right hip joint, and then I'm going to hold down the control key and click on the control satchel group. And then what I'm going to do, this is just going to be a parent constraint. So parent constraint. All right, so if I go move my right leg, the satchel will move with it. So if you can see that easier there. So the satchel will move and rotate with it. If I move the pelvis, the satchel will move and rotate with the body now. So if you need an accessory that just moves all the time with one joint, that's how we can set that up. This hierarchy works well because I can still come in and do secondary kind of wobbling motion with the curve control for the satchel, but the group is what is being parented to the joint of the hip. So this kind of double control works really well with the control itself. Has the individual motion of the satchel, and the group is what is parented underneath, or parent constraint underneath the hip joint. So that works really well. All right, so the other thing is, well, what if I want my hand over here to at some point come over here and pick up that satchel, and the satchel follows what the hand does. So in order to do this, I need another parent constraint, but I need to go ahead and position the body or the arm over here, so that way the satchel is kind of in the arm. So this is a little bit of sideways ways of creating the proper double parent constraint, but this is the way that it can work properly. So what I'm going to do is, let's take our two spine joints, and I'm going to go ahead and position my body as if my character is reaching its arm over here to pick up that satchel. So something like that. We'll get the elbow, we'll bend that a little bit. Turn off our joints for right now. And I just want a position that it looks like my character is picking up the satchel. I'm going to ignore that my cloth is clipping, because really all I think that matters right now is that the arm looks like it's picking up the satchel. Okay, something like that. And we might rotate it a little more. Go ahead and rotate the elbow back. That looks pretty good. Now let's come in here with the wrist and make sure it looks like the wrist is kind of trying to pick that satchel up. Okay, that should work pretty close, right? So what we are going to do is, yeah, it looks all right there. Not too great, but maybe I'll adjust the twist of the body. And I'm just doing this temporarily to get the parent on here properly. And then I'll reduce and remove out this rotate position of the arm and the torso back to what it was. There we go. We'll do a little bit more rotate with the wrist here. That's pretty good. There we go. So I don't even have to worry about the fingers. I just want the wrist positioned over here, because when I do this second parent for my satchel group, the arm needs to be in place. Otherwise, the control is going to pop around. So temporarily, I want to rotate the body so that the arm is over here looking like it's reaching to pick up that control or that satchel. Let's turn our joints back on, because we're going to drive this motion with what the wrist does. So we're going to find the wrist control or wrist joint. And then in the outliner, I'm going to control click on that satchel group. And we're going to go to constrain parent. All right. So with that satchel group selected, it doesn't tell you that there's two parent constraints on there. It's still one parent constraint. There's my parent constraint node. But if I select that satchel group, here's the two nodes that tell me underneath the parent constraint, I have one constraint that's assigned to the joint right hip, and then one assigned to the joint left wrist. Okay, they're both set to on, which is 1. So temporarily, I'm going to type 0 for both of them. So that way the wrist and the hip will not affect this. And after I connected that second parent constraint, I'm going to come in here to my body that I've posed and zero out the rotates and any transforms that I might have. So I'm going to zero out the rotates on the spine joints that I adjusted, and we will also zero out the rotates on, this is the shoulder. We'll go to the wrist, or the elbow, so the elbow next, 0. And then we'll go to the wrist and zero out those. So basically we're putting the character back in the T-pose. Okay. But the character's arm and body needs to be in the pose when that parent is set up. All right, so now back on the control satchel group. The parent constraints are these two last ones down here, and they're both set to 0, which means it's not currently parented to anything. So I move the hip or the leg, it's not going to rotate it or move it. If I move the wrist, it's not going to move that satchel. The parent constraint is still on there, we just have it temporarily turned off for both. So what this is nice and an easy way to set this up is that if I put a value of 1 for that joint R hip for the right hip joint parent, now my satchel will follow my hip. Okay. If I do the opposite, if I do a value of 0 for the hip and 1 for the wrist, it's going to pop that satchel over here to the wrist, and if I rotate or move the arm, it's going to follow with the arm. Okay. So that's the proper way of setting up the double parent constraint. Now in the animation, what we would do is we would move the arm over to the satchel and then do that switching of which parent is currently on in the animation. So we would do that in the animation, but this is how the controls would be set up. All right, so instead of having to go find the group and find the parent, what we can do is just do like a set-driven key switch. So what I've already set up is the same control that I put all of my finger controls on. So all of these are, this is the left hand control. I've added a custom attribute called Satchel Parent. So I'll just remove that out and recreate that. Delete that for right now. So with this control selected, I'm going to go to Modify, since it is the left hand that I want that satchel to be parented to. Modify, add attribute, and we'll call it Satchel Parent. I'm just going to do a minimum of 0, maximum of 1, because I just want it to be an on-off control. So let's click OK. So it adds that secondary attribute to this control. All right, so we're going to do a set-driven key. So underneath the animation module, I'm going to go to Key, Set-Driven Key, and then the option box beside Set. All right, here it is. Pull it up here so it's out of the way. All right, so this is going to be the driver. So I'm going to select my curved left hand control, load driver, and come down on the right side and click Satchel Parent. And then I'm going to go find the parent constraint node underneath my control satchel group, and then do load driven. Okay. This way, that's going to give me the two nodes that I'm going to switch back and forth between when I want the hand to be the parent of the satchel versus the hip to be the parent of the satchel. All right, so when my curved left hand attribute of satchel parent is 0, I want the parent to be on the hip. So 0 means no, the hand is not going to be the parent to the satchel, so the parent should be on the hip. So let's satchel parent attribute 0. Let's go to our control satchel group parent constraint node and put a value of 1 for the joint right hip attribute and a 0 for the joint left wrist. Okay. So that means this is going to be a parent of the hip in this mode. So let's do key. And that keys both of them, which is what I want, both of those two attributes. And then when I go back to the control and change that satchel parent attribute to 1, now I want the parent to be on the wrist. So let's type a value of 0 for the joint right hip and a value of 1 for the joint left wrist. The control will pop over there to the hand. And let's do key. clicking the key button in the set-driven key editor. I don't need a set-driven key editor anymore. So what that means is I just have one control over here that I'll just type in a value of 0 if I want the hip to be the parent. So the hip's the parent of the satchel now. Or if I want the wrist to be the parent, I'm going to type in a value of 1 for the satchel parent attribute. That's going to pop the satchel over here to the hand, and then now when the hand moves, the satchel will move with the hand. So that's an easy way to set up double parent constraints when you need one accessory to sometimes move with the hip and sometimes also move with the wrist. Okay, so that's an easy setup between the two here. All right, that's how really any accessory can be created with one of those two methods. There's some other subsets that can be done, but overall that's how accessories can be created. I'm going to pause the video and do some set-driven keys with the top of the bag, and then I'll come back and show you that to finalize this video. But the set-driven keys I'm about to create will be done the same way as the fingers, or a similar way to how I did that satchel parent. I'm going to come back after I create them and show you how I did that. All right, so I'm back. So what I've done here is I've set up two set-driven keys with custom attributes. And this is within the set-driven key editor again. And I've already set this up, but basically the control is the load driver. And then I've clicked on one of my two new custom attributes. I typed it top upper rotate, top lower rotate. And then my driven is, for the top upper rotate is my 3 joints at the top side. And for my lower rotate is my 3 lower joints. So that would select those and then do lower rotates on my lower 2 joints, or lower 3 joints there. So what I've done here is I have a upper rotate from 0 to 10 that allows me to kind of rotate that, and I minimize clicking and dragging. And then I have a top lower rotate that allows me to kind of curl the bottom side as well. So what that'll be really nice for is that I can have this kind of flap around as if gravity's taking hold of it, or if I want the player to pick something up and put something in the satchel, that'll be a good easy way to do something like that. So the main curve satchel control has the motion of the entire satchel, and then I have individual custom attributes with set-driven keys that drive secondary motion on that control. And this should all still work properly according to my hierarchy that I've set up here. So the parenting is still working properly there, and it still all works with the control of the hand over here with the parent. So that wraps up this video talking about accessory controls. Showed how to do the cloth controls, and then also showed how to do satchel controls as well.